مرحبا وأهلا بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. السياسيون مثل السهرة محملون بالمفاجآت، ولكن عندما يتجاوز السياسي عام هي 80 فمن المرجح أن تكون مفاجأته عبارة عن إحياء فكرة أو سياسة أو صورة من الماضي وتقديمها كشيء جديد. هذه إحدى الطرق لوصف جهود جو بايدن لإضفاء الحيوية وإثارة على حملته. في نورماندي على سبيل المثال احتفل بايدن بالذكرى 80 لغزو الحلفاء لأوروبا من خلال استحضار صورة رونالد ريغان الذي ألقى أحد أكثر الخطابات التي لا تنسى في حياته في تلك المناسبة قبل 40 عاما. وفي داخل أمريكا تبنى بايدن فكرة قديمة ولكنها لا تزال جدلية لإصلاح أزمة الحدود، حيث أصدر أمرا ينص على أن أي شخص يعبر الحدود بشكل غير قانوني لن تكون مؤهلة للوصول على حق اللجوء. لم تعجب هذه الفكرة المحاكم من قبل وقد لا تعجبها مرة أخرى، إلا أن بايدن يعمل أن الأمر قد يغير وجهة نظر الشعبية القائلة بأنه ضعيف فيما يتعلق بالهجرة غير الشرعية. هل ستساعد هذه الأفكار والصور القديمة بايدن على الفوز بالولاية الثانية؟ لمناقشة استراتيجية حملة الرئيس يسعدني أن أرحب بالمراقبين السياسيين ستيف كليمنز، دانيال ليبمان وتود جيلمان. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. Is Joe Biden triangulating? That's a word that Bill Clinton used and made famous in the 1990s when the liberal Clinton borrowed some conservative themes to put him somewhere in the middle of the American political map. Is Joe Biden taking a page from the Clinton playbook? Let's take a look at all this with Todd Gilman, Steve Clemens, and Daniel Lippman. All right, Todd, Joe Biden in Normandy sought to conjure up images of Ronald Reagan. Why?
Well, he did double duty. There was the domestic audience and there was the foreign audience. Certainly, like Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan is one of those iconic presidents that who future presidents, subsequent presidents, like to invoke regardless of party. For Biden to go there and invoke Reagan's defense of American participation on the world stage was a very important message to send to Putin and to other potential adversaries. And it was a very important domestic message during the presidential campaign to differentiate himself implicitly and not all that subtly from Donald Trump and his Make America First, non-interventionist sort of distancing himself from NATO kind of platform, which a lot of even the Republican foreign policy establishment, traditional Republicans, Reagan Republicans find absolutely anathema. And so Biden, by being presidential, which of course he is the president, and saying, look what America can do on the world stage. We can defend democracy. We can fight down authoritarianism. And the subtext of that is, I got this guy breathing down my neck in November.
And Steve, this had to be a complicated political moment for Joe Biden, 80 years old plus, a generation older than his host, the president of France, and almost the same age as all those greatest generation veterans that he was saluting for D-Day. Did he navigate that imagery well, in your view?
No, I think he did do it well. Look, as you said, he has an intimacy with that time. And that's both a strength and a problem for him. It's a strength because guess who votes in elections? older Americans. And many people resonate to a time of, sacrifice and patriotism, and kind of, there is this sort of yearning in some circles for a kind of patriotism that stopped, at water's edge, where politics had ended at water's edge, meaning that in times of national crisis, people came together across parties and they did what Todd said. They fought, bad guys, and they saw America as the good guys rushing to the aid and rescue of our French allies and other European allies. And so I think that he played that well. The problem was, the world that grew out of that moment, the world of, American leadership in the world and, fighting the Cold War against the Soviet Union. That is a frame that Joe Biden carries around strongly in his mind. The next generation, the younger generation, has no conceptual connection with that time. And so while they're doing that over there, and I really, find it was powerful imagery, and I think Joe Biden did a good job there, but he's further and further out of touch in another dimension with a lot of young voters in America.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that. Daniel, his message about American global responsibility across the aisle, it was shared by some, even some of his opponents, like Mitch McConnell, echoes the same theme. But does it resonate more generally in the American public?
Well, most voters are not going to vote based on high-minded principles of democracy and freedom. They're thinking about, hey, the food costs more at the grocery store and gas is more expensive, even though inflation is coming down. And so he has to kind of connect freedom and democracy and say, hey, this is all at risk if Trump is reelected. And he'll have to talk about Trump's economic message, too, in terms of tariffs on, across the board tariffs, which would increase prices. And he would say that, telling CEOs that it's not good for a president to be isolationist, that we need to have trade with other countries in the world. We can't just be on our own island. And so it's all melded together. And this, of course, comes right after he can say, well, this is a common criminal that you would return to the Oval Office. Do you really want someone who's been convicted of 34 felonies to be negotiating with Vladimir Putin?
So your point is that even if Biden thinks the most important issue here is saving American democracy, he still needs to connect it to bread and butter issues for the average voter. Is that right?
Yeah, he has to kind of both connect it and also do a dual track where he tells Americans what he plans to do for the next 4 years. He reminds people about what he's accomplished in the last 3.5. Because a lot of Americans don't feel it in terms of unless you bought a electric car, you're not benefiting from electric car subsidies. Unless you have solar panels on your rooftop of your house, then that hasn't really affected you much. And so I think the challenge is he has to tell people, hey, Trump was tried to subvert the election last time, and that he's all in it for himself. And I'm here to serve you, the American people. And I don't, I'm not as selfish as Trump, basically.
So, Todd, there was another theme that the president adopted recently that does resonate with a lot of voters, and that was getting tough on illegal immigration. He adopted a remarkably tough guy posture for somebody from his political pedigree. What was that, and why did he do it?
Well, the domestic political pressures had become absolutely unbearable as the election gets closer and as the migrant crisis at the southern border persists, as it has throughout his presidency. What he did is he said that the U.S. is no longer going to accept asylum requests, claims, except by people who already had an appointment and crossed at a point of entry, an official port of entry along the border, not sneak across, which many people, the rule has been, and the law is, that once you touch on American soil, if you have an asylum claim to make, you have a fear of persecution back home, you can ask the nearest federal law enforcement official, Border Patrol agent, for an asylum process. And what Biden has done is say, as long as border crossings are at an average of 2,500 a day, illegal crossings, we will stop. We will freeze that ordinary procedure, and border crossings haven't been under that cap in a very long time, which is why it has become such a political nightmare for the Democrats, to the point that the president could no longer afford to do little or nothing that looked tough. So he has borrowed a play from Donald Trump's playbook in shutting the border in some sense. There are loopholes. Unaccompanied minors can always pursue an asylum claim, but it's a peculiar move in that it is never going to go. It absolutely does not go far enough to mollify conservatives and get them off of his back, or take the issue away from Trump. And it has absolutely angered some segment of the Democratic base by looking somewhat callous towards migrants. It's kind of a lesser of evil sort of policy for him.
So, Steve, I mean, this was tried before and courts have shot this down. What makes anybody think that this is going to get through the courts again this time?
Well, look, I mean, it's a problem where American principle, has largely been the fact that we were a safe haven for those that were under siege, harassed, detained, killed, et cetera, around the world. And so it's nice to have that as part of, the American DNA. But on the other hand, we have hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of cases backlogged in our courts. You have delays of people that have come over, sought asylum, and they are delayed for 5 or 6 years. And now it's become a practiced act where many people are coming over and asking for asylum when they touch ground, as Todd said, and they go at the end of the queue of the process. And so what I think Joe Biden is sensing and feeling from his Democratic mayors in cities around the United States, as much as there's Republican complaints, there are Democratic complaints within the parties, and particularly from very popular cities who have identified, this huge surge in immigration is also a part of a perception of rising crime. And we don't have a process, which Joe Biden has not done, and no one's done, frankly, is figure out how do you unclog a legal system that is choking on this number of cases and is under-resourced in processing them. So I think that the only thing they ended up with was in the box that Donald Trump was in, which is trying to block any asylum seekers, except those that have gone through a process external to the United States. So that's what's going on, and I think the politics of it show it as a win for the sort of Trump anti-immigrant crowd. It's something that Joe Biden took a while to evolve towards, and in my view, I've done a lot of interviews on this subject, they haven't fixed the real fundamental nuts and bolts problem of how do they process those asylum seekers in the United States now.
And Daniel, when let's look at the politics here for a minute. When Bill Clinton did this with welfare in the 1990s, get tough on welfare, he gained more among the center than he lost among the left. Is that what will happen with Joe Biden on immigration?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of people on the left who will say, hey, Biden is being super unreasonable here. They know that he's under political pressures, that if Trump came back, he is promising a widespread deportation program of millions of illegal immigrants to be thrown out of the country. And Biden is not doing that. And so Biden is the more progressive candidate on immigration. And so I think that they understand that the asylum system is broken, that Biden tried to address this legislatively in Congress earlier this year, and Republicans refused to even have a border security bill in the first place. This was not even a compromise bill, and Trump said he wanted to keep this as a political hot issue. And so that's why Biden is turning to this executive memorandum right now to try to get a handle on the border. And we've seen some results so far, and we'll just have to see if it continues.
All right, when we come back after the break, we'll discuss that with our panel in just a moment. My guests again today include Steve Clemens. Steve is the founding editor-at-large for Semaphore, an international news site. Previously, he was at The Hill, The Atlantic, New America Foundation, and the Nixon Center for peace and freedom. Also with us is Daniel Lippman. Daniel covers the Washington political scene for Politico, where he also authors the social data section of Politico's New York Playbook. Previously, he was a reporter with the Wall Street Journal in New York. And with us is Todd Gilman. Todd spent more than 30 years as a reporter for the Dallas Morning News, including a decade as its Washington bureau chief. He is past president of the Regional Reporters Association and has been elected 3 times to the board of the White House Correspondents Association. All right, Todd, since you have such a connection to Texas, a key border state, the Biden immigration innovation was designed, at least in part, to get at a couple of border states that are key states in the presidential election. But those states like Nevada and Arizona seem to be the most of all those key states leaning to Donald Trump. Do you think the Biden move on immigration will have an impact in either of those states?
I don't know if it'll have a direct impact in those states. I think that Steve made a really important point that Biden was getting an enormous amount of pressure from Democratic mayors and governors around the country, in part because the governor of Texas and a handful of other Republican governors had taken some very aggressive tactics to shift illegal migrants from their own states up north and away from the border into Democratic cities like Chicago and New York. And New York State has absorbed just an enormous number of migrants. And Texas Republicans are just dancing about, oh, finally they get it. They understand what we have been dealing with for years and years and years. So as a sort of a bank shot sort of move, it will help blunt some of the bleeding and some of the carping from his own left flank. Whether it has direct benefits in swing states like Arizona or Nevada, I would say it's a marginal issue. It's just part of the overall mix.
And Steve, if Joe Biden has moved a bit to the center on immigration and is invoking Ronald Reagan, are there other issues that you can imagine him tacking to the center in the months before the election, toward that key undecided vote that people think may determine the outcome?
Well, look, I think that Joe Biden that we see in progressive fundraisers is going to sound different than Joe Biden in centrist fundraisers. I mean, that's just the nature of politically. But I see, the possibility where Joe Biden is trying to have it on both sides regarding, oil and gas and energy. And, to what degree, while he's basically restricted some permits for drilling, he's also taking credit for, having broken the back of OPEC and, created conditions where, America's strategic energy reserves, oil reserves are very, very robust. So he's playing both sides of a number of equations, but I think that's there. And I also imagine on crime, you're going to see a greater commitment to sort of law and order, which I think is a very, very high profile issue. On the economic front, we've seen a continuing mellowing of the inflation rate. And I think you're going to continue to see Joe Biden play it there. But where he hasn't, it's been interesting because Joe Biden has kind of doubled down on a lot of the Trump trade sanctions with China, continuing to maintain these sanctions. I mean, if he took these sanctions down, it might be seen as being soft on China, but it certainly would further dampen inflation. It would help a lot of working Americans. And so he is definitely triangulating, as you said in the beginning, in a lot of interesting ways. And we'll have to see what unfolds further.
All right. So with that as a premise, Daniel Lippman.
So what Biden has to do is to shake up this race, because right now he is narrowly behind, according to a bunch of polls. A lot of the Washington punditry class thinks that he would lose the election if it was held today. And so he is looking to put Trump on the defensive. And the best way to do that is to have a major tentpole moment.
So, Todd, it's an odd moment in American politics. What do you think?
I think that Trump truly believes that Biden is a drooling, dementia-laden old guy, and Biden thinks that Trump comes off as an authoritarian, Putin lover, China lover, North Korea lover, criminal, and they each think that the other is so vulnerable that whatever their own vulnerabilities, they're either ignoring them or on balance, they're willing to take that risk. I think they each have quite a lot to lose, but as we've seen mostly over the years, debates don't truly matter in the grand scheme of things.
So, Steve, you were shaking your head up and down, seeming to support Todd's assertion. What do you think?
These are two grumpy old men, and they're very well known and exposed. Americans already have seen this race before. This is deja vu all over again, to quote Yogi Berra. And you have a situation where they're replaying. I think Todd framed it exactly right. Both of them think the other is highly vulnerable. But these are two kind of old cantankerous guys that we know really well, and so there's very little that either can do to shake up, in my view, the impression that most Americans have. They got sucked into this, in the way that Daniel also talked about. I'll double dare you, all do this and come in and meet your challenge and meet you on the battlefield. But the true issue here is it's in neither interest to appear right now. Neither is fully prepared, and both. Either or both could lose a lot in the eyes of Americans who already don't want to see this race. You have to understand, most Americans do not want to see these two people on the tops of these two tickets. That's a majority of Americans.
Daniel, if you were offering advice to the two candidates, what would be the headline that you would want, that you think would be most effective for Joe Biden to use against Donald Trump, and the headline that will be most effective for Donald Trump to use against Joe Biden? So for
my advice for, and I'm glad I'm not a paid political consultant because I might have to find a new living. So it's good to be just a nonpartisan journalist. But for putting your consultant hat on, I would tell Trump that he has to appear to be likable and not be too mean, and to not exploit, say, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, for political purposes that much, because he doesn't want to appear uncaring, because there's a lot of Americans who have struggled with drug addiction or know people, or either in their family or their friend groups who have done so. And he doesn't want to be too cantankerous, basically, for Biden. Probably get a lot of sleep and try to have a repeat of the State of the Union, where a lot of Americans thought that he couldn't string together two sentences, but he was able to yell his way to a successful State of the Union performance a few months ago.
A kinder, gentler Donald Trump. Is this a feasible possibility, Todd Gilman?
Not a chance. There's no way, although I think that Daniel's advice is sound, hypothetical advice to Trump would be sound. There is no way that he is not going to harp on the Biden crime family and all of that. There's no conceivable universe where Trump doesn't go for the throat. Trump got to be Trump. Biden's got to be Biden. I think if I were their wives, sometimes my wife gives me the advice before a dinner party, just be yourself, but maybe a little less. And I think that's what they both kind of need to do to get through this.
That would be wonderful to see. Thank you so much, Todd Gilman, Steve Clemens, Daniel Lippman, for joining me this week on داخل واشنطن. وصلنا إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، خاصة فيما يتعلق بأهمية أمن الحدود كقضية سياسية في انتخابات هذا العام، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مراسلتي @RobSatloff. أراكم في الأسبوع المقبل، وحتى ذلك الحين شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.